Hi everybody. So this is going to be the short video for just some of the basics of graphing. And this is going to take you through how do you set up the Google Sheet and then what are some of the functions that you can use while in Google Sheets that is going to allow you to do a lot more data analysis than we maybe would be able to do by hand. So we're going to focus on Google Sheets rather than graphing by hand, especially because we are in this blended format. It seems to make sense that we would focus on Google Sheets. Now, this is only the basics video. There will be a follow-up part 2 video that will look at, what happens when we need to linearize our data, meaning that we got some data set that was non-linear, so we couldn't use y is equal to mx plus b. How can we manipulate our data in order to get it into a form that we are familiar with? So that will be part 2, and then a part 3 video that will come towards the end of week 1, maybe the beginning of week 2. That will look at, what do we do when we actually want to analyze this data now? Because we don't just want to collect data, we want to do something with it. We want to form some type of conclusion. But before we can do any of that, we need the basics. So when you set up your Google Sheet and you're setting up your data table, there is a standard. You don't have choice over this. Standard form is that whatever is on the left-hand side of your data table, that is your x-axis, and on your x-axis is always the independent variable. So this is the same for all of your science classes, same thing for math class. Then on the right-hand column, that is your y-axis, which is always the dependent variable. And independent versus dependent variables are things that if you needed a refresher, that you would have read that in that scientific thinking reading if you haven't done so already. But those are definitely two terms that you want to know and want to be able to use. Now, when you set up your data table, regardless of if you're doing it in Google Sheets, if you're making it in your notebook, every data table has the same set that X is on the left, Y is on the right. Again, you don't have choice over that. You must set it up that way. So, knowing that X is on the left, Y is on the right, I'm going to go ahead and input some data that was collected. So, notice when I input this data, give me 1 second, let's get rid of that. These values at the bottom do not have units with them. Google Sheets does not know how to do any computing with letters. It only knows how to do any mathematical computation with numbers. So on top of the numbers, you have to put, here is the title, and here is the unit, because numbers always get units. You don't just say 10. Well, 10 what? What are you talking about? So we know that this is 0 days, 10 days, 20 days. But because Excel or Google Sheets can't compute letters, we have to put the title with the units up at the top. If you go ahead and graph on your own and you're like, man, this graph, this doesn't even make any sense. Most likely what happened is that you put the units with the numbers within this. So that should be the first thing that you check. All right, so we're looking at time, which is in days, versus the depth of rainwater in the gauge. So we're seeing how much is that rainwater kind of collecting. Now, when you start, you don't need to put that X is IV, Y is DV, just so you know. That was just a kind of to illustrate where everything needs to be. Okay, so then once we have this, in order to actually get the graph, you need to click on an open box. There can't be anything in it. So I've clicked on an open box. Now I want to go to Insert, and I want to go to Chart. Maybe. There we go. All right, so then you're going to see that there has been no data entered. That's because you're manually going to put the data in. So when we come over here to our chart editor, we see the x-axis. We want to add the x-axis, and then I want to select only the data. Again, Google Sheets cannot compute letters, so we are only selecting the data, so which is going to be 0 to 50 for my X. I'm going to hit OK. And it may pop up with the graph. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You're not done because you didn't input the Y data yet. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go, here's my X, but now I want to add a series. So I'm going to add series and I'm going to hit select data range. So I want to hit that box. And now I'm going to select my Y data. There we go. So now I have my data in, but I can't leave my chart like this. A bar graph definitely doesn't make any sense, nor would a pie graph. So the only thing that we ever use in physics is a scatter plot. And again, that is the only thing that we use in physics. So when I go over to chart type, I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to scatter. All right, so now that I have that, I'm missing a lot of things on my graph. I don't have titles, I don't have units, so I need to put those in. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to double click my x-axis. So I double clicked on the numbers down here. And one thing that I want to make sure on my x-axis is that my minimum value is indeed 0. Because if you don't have your minimum value 0, what Excel tends to do is, here, I'll just go ahead and show you. If I would delete these, and I'll delete that point. See what happened? All of a sudden, because I didn't have 0 as my minimum, it now makes it appear as if my origin is 0, 10. But the origin is not 0, 10. The origin is always 0, 0. So if this was the case, I would double click here. And then I would make my minimum 0 so that I can actually see the trend properly. Oh, sorry, you can see this. So I can see the trend properly. Now, luckily for this data set, 0, 0 was a point. So I can go ahead and put that back in. But do make sure that whenever you graph that you always have either the minimum set to 0 or that 0, 0 is a point if it's applicable. If you don't do that, you could end up getting a graph that tells you one trend. It may appear one way, but it's not correct because you lost a whole set of data points. When it had gone to 0, 10, you lost everything from 0 to 10. But the fact of the matter is there was time in between 0 and 10. Well, what happened on day 2? You pretty much eliminated that. And we don't want to eliminate data. So make sure you go ahead and do that. So now that I'm here, let's go back. And I'm going to go ahead and put in those titles. So I'm going to once again double click on the bottom. And I want to, where am I? I want to go to chart and axis titles. And then, okay, so my full chart title is going to be time versus rain. So just something that is going to describe what you're looking at. And then we can see that it has popped up here. Now I want to go to my horizontal axis, which is going to be time in days. Make sure that you have the title and the units. And then my vertical axis is going to be, I'll put depth and in centimeters. Okay, so now I have all the basic things in there. So now what can we do with this mathematically? So I'm going to go ahead and go down. We're going to go, back to customize. And I'm going to go to series. In series, you can do a lot of things. So what I want you to first do is put a trend line in. Now you're going to be given a couple different options for the trend line. So if we look here, a linear trend doesn't really seem to fit too well, but you have the option of an exponential. So that starts to curve it. We have the option of a polynomial, which again is a curved top opening function. And then you would have the logarithmic, which that's more of a side opening function. But again, your reading is going to talk about the top opening versus side opening. That's not what this video is about. So we want to have the trend that matches the best. And you may be saying, okay, well, if I'm looking, there we go. So if I'm looking between exponential and polynomial, polynomial does look better. But if we were kind of, concerned, we're like, it might be close, we go down to an R squared value. And what the R squared value does is it says, how accurate are you to this trend line? And what we want to typically do is get a trend line that is above 95%. Now, because that means that you're 95% accurate. You want the highest possible accuracy. So if one is 95 and one is 98, then you go with the one that's 98. If something has no effect, that means that it's not going to fit on any trend line. So think about, what is that R-squared value going to be? Well, probably close to 0. So don't freak out if you get a really, really, really small R-squared value. Sometimes there really is just no effect. So I'm going to go ahead and hit R-squared, and I see that this polynomial function is 99% accurate. So we would want to multiply that by 100, and we see that it's 99%. I can be confident with my results if I am 99% accurate. Now, the very last thing that I would want to do is I want to go ahead and look at a label, and where it says custom, I want to use equation. Now, I really don't like how Google Sheets does this, but you can't change it. This is your equation. R squared and over is not part of your equation. They just did a really bad job formatting this. So your equation is y equals this whole equation. Now, you may be looking at that and saying, I have no idea what that means. That's okay, because when we have something that is non-linear, that's where linearization comes in. So what we're going to do is manipulate the data by just representing it in a different form. And since this is a top opening, we would go ahead and square the x values, and when we would do that, we would go ahead and get a linear graph. But that's going to be our video number 2 that's going to talk about that a little bit more. These are just the basic functions that you need in order to navigate your way through Google Sheets. All right, if you have any questions, as always, let me know, and I hope this was helpful.